Good morning, everyone. I am Ray Topping, the Director of FIATEC, and on behalf of all of us at FIATEC, I'd like to thank you for joining us for today's webinar on strategies for knowledge transfer in asset management using 3D technologies. Today we have an exciting hour set aside for Nelia Mazula to present to us. But before we get started with the presentation, I'd like to first review a couple things on the GoToWebinar system. First, on the right-hand side of your screen, you should have the control panel for the presentation, and if you'd like that to be minimized, you can hit that orange arrow that's on the little side piece, and it will minimize that piece for you. And you can maximize the screen that's being presented by Nelia Mazula by hitting that maximize button on the upper right-hand side. Throughout the webinar, your speakers will be, your microphones will be muted because we have a lot of participants and it carries a lot of background noise if everyone's live through the meeting. So you're muted through the GoToWebinar connection. But we do want questions, and we welcome your questions and input. So if you can enter questions using the control panel on the right-hand side under questions or chat, either one, and I'll collect those throughout the webinar. And we'll have time at the end, 20 minutes or so, to go through questions and discussions. And questions will be read anonymously, so feel free to ask any question that you have, and we'll do our best between Nelia and I to answer those. The webinars are recorded, and they'll be posted on the FIATEC website under our webinars, our website at fiatec.org. Before I introduce today's speaker, I just want to remind you that FIATEC's a member-based organization. We bring together companies to drive productivity and efficiency improvements in capital projects through deployment of technology and innovative practices. We have about 80 member companies and about 20 participants, collaboration or partners, so about 100 active organizations. If you're interested in joining or would like more information on future webinars, feel welcome to drop me a note. It's my last name, Topping, at fiatec.org. Now I'd like to introduce Nelia Mazula. Nelia has 13 years of experience in the oil and gas process engineering, engineering information solutions, and engineering visualization solutions for asset management. She's held various positions in technology implementation, sales and management for leading engineering software development companies, and is currently a senior strategic planner for Dassault Systems focused on oil and gas asset management. So Nelia, welcome you to lead our webinar today.
Thank you, Ray. Thank you for the introduction, and thank you for having me as a speaker for this webinar. We'll go through the title of it, the Strategies for Knowledge Transfer Asset Management Using 3D. I did try to shorten that title, but I couldn't. It really will be more of a strategy session. I will present some thoughts around this and some tangible deliverables that everybody can take away. Obviously not in the degree of detail that we probably do for our internal review or customer, but definitely something that you could take home and take away from this conversation. So again, just with time limitations and everything, we'll try to go through everything. I will just do a little bit of an introduction of where I'm coming from, a little bit about who we are. We'll go through a problem analysis in this space. What is this space and what are the issues? And then we'll look at some things from an asset perspective because, again, this space is so big and there's so many variants. So we'll try to talk about it in a kind of a focused space, kind of a boundary. We'll talk about some of the different options and strategies, and then we'll talk about the market, and then I'll open it up for questions. So just real quick, Dassault is a big company. I won't spend a lot of time on this slide. The goal of this is to say we're global, we're huge. We act as a global team, so if wherever you are around the world, our folks we're all collaborative and we're a team. So you don't have to talk to someone, you don't have to talk to Nelia in the United States. You could talk to somebody that's based in Europe or in one of our offices in Asia, and we share and talk on a daily basis. The other very interesting thing about this is that 1/3 of our revenues are R&D, so we're really an innovation company. I like this slide because it emphasizes from the top level that we are a 3D organization. So we focus on all things 3D and all things that enable and provide automation of that, integration of that, and management of 3D in an industrial setting. So this is our CEO saying that, and this is what basically is the underlining pin of our mission. And to do that, to be focused on 3D, we've got a ton of brands, and each brand acts like a little company inside of Dassault. We've got about 11 of them, each generating innovation. I sit in the company called 3D Via. 3D Via is focused on interactive visualization primarily, and we do a couple of different things in this space. I'll talk about it as we go forward. It's very important because the focus that I'm bringing is how do we leverage some of the things that we've been doing in the front end on the engineering side further on into operations. So let's first look at some of the problems in this space, some of the issues, and this is just a snapshot. There are a ton of things that are kind of boiling up that we are going to have to start looking at using innovation. The one that comes up in almost every conference and webinar that I go to is some slide that looks like this one, which is a labor force participation slide. This is coming from the Department of Labor. You can go to their website and get a lot more granularity on how these things are produced. They put a lot of effort into this. But fundamentally, their observations are that from the 1960s up until somewhere in the early 2000s, we had this pretty consistent increase, and the majority of that was the participation of women in the workforce. So, and somewhere around that time, we hit a saturation point. So, not to say that more women won't participate. It's just that that contribution won't impact the labor force participation in the same way. Now, what is impacting the labor force participation now is the retiring baby boomers. So we have a flux of retiring knowledge that's already started and will continue to happen. And some of those people are coming back from retirement as consultants, which is always a good thing. But as you can see in this graph, we'll have to start to look at technology and innovation to resolve these issues. The other one in this space, and again, for limitations of time, I'm not going into a lot of detail on these statistics and the reports. These reports are very well laid out in these sources. Feel free to go and look through them. This particular one I pulled from the New York Times. Edward Chow, Dr. Edward Chow, is a senior fellow at the Center for Strategic and International Studies, and basically they're asking what are the complexities of deep offshore drilling, what are the issues, and he basically went on for several paragraphs, and just to summarize, the depth of the water, the complexity of these rigs, the distance from shore, all these hazards, hydrates, winds, currents. All this is then being monitored and captured by these facilities. So we know about this in the oil industry, the owner-operators, the contractors, everybody knows about these complexities. And we've put in place a series of facilities and technology to monitor, capture, and hedge against risk. But as you can start to see, all of this is culminating into a cloud of things we need to address, and maybe in a more creative way, and maybe with interoperability and other strategies, and we'll talk about those as they go through, but this adds to the story, right? The other thing that was in this article was the difference, we have these adjectives, so we're saying deep offshore. Well, in 1979, deep offshore is about 1,000 feet deep. And now we're looking at deep offshore where we're, over 10 times the depth of what we were in 1979. So that's, again, going to impact the quantity of data, the quantity of monitoring, the amount of hazard and risk that we're going into. And that's going to drive a lot of the decisions that we make going forward. And obviously, to get even more of these resources, we're probably going to have to go deeper and deeper offshore into more interesting spaces. And then here's the third one, right? You know, in the last few years, the first two problems have started to creep up, and maybe they're not as obvious, but we start to see some of these incidences occur. And they're as a result of a number of different things. The result of those incidents is that governments have to react and people get scared. So I think the industry can expect that we will be getting more regulation and have more scrutiny on the responsibilities. And maybe some of those areas aren't necessarily where the industry would have prioritized them, but they're probably going to be coming. So here we have David Hayes, U.S. Department of Interior, and a quote in the Journal of Petroleum Technology. And fundamentally, what he's saying is that, look, you know, how are we doing emergency shutdowns? We need to scrutinize that even more. We need more data. We need more regulation, maintenance regulations, monitoring. And then he said training regulations. And he did say in the article also, he referred back to, you know, flight simulators and how airlines are doing their training for their pilots. This is a wave of stuff that's coming down the pipeline. It's already started, really, and that we can expect. So before I talk on how to look at those problems and address those problems using some of the innovations that I'm focused on for this presentation, let me talk about, you know, oil and gas is a big space. Facilities and asset management is a big space. You go, and then if you're just talking about the asset, you have a life of the asset. So we've all seen a version of this diagram, you know, all the way from concept from cradle to grave, as they say, from concept to shutdown or decommissioning. And what we tried to do here was say, okay, in this space, and most of you on the line probably, but many folks already in the industry understand how we could start to use 3D at any given point in what we call the life cycle of the asset. So I think it's clear to everybody on the design and construction. Maybe not as clear as we get into operations in Hanover, but there's definitely a lot of technical innovation in this space and a lot of things that folks have already started using. So the big question is then, well, we already have 3D CAD design. Why don't we just use that all the way through the life cycle? And that question comes up. And there's a lot of questions in this space as to how do we use 3D, what kind of 3D? Well, first thing, there's different 3D. We have the CAD for the design and the life cycle asset. Again, the CAD is there for design. You have things called CAD viewers that allow you to look at the CAD and maybe even make some annotations and maybe even share that CAD. The CAD development and management is really a specialist tool. And sometimes you have to go and even go to college and get certification or even a degree or classes in this space. So it's not designed for the lay person to come and casually use. You have to have some training in it. It's also a rigid tool. It's really designed to produce a product. And the kind of the comparison I give is if you wanted to use a construction truck. You would you'd use a big truck and something that can move a lot of weight around. As we go further into the life cycle, the needs are different, and for a number of reasons. As you get further in, you're looking at it, you're wanting to leverage that CAD to use maybe for planning, maybe you're using it for project management, you may be using it to look at data, to find and look at data from an asset perspective, or to optimize a maintenance structure. And we can get very sophisticated in this space, but really as you're getting further in, you're using more of the interactivity of the CAD or the 3D itself. So again, you're using it differently. Your users are probably different. There are people that are probably going in casually. They have a number of other tools that they're using. They're not just focused on CAD. They're using it as another one of the many tools they use on a day-to-day basis. And it's more of a reporting tool or a visualization, a way of looking at data. And again, I equate this, if I were looking at, you know, construction truck, This is now where we're using just kind of a pickup, right? Something that can maneuver on the streets. You don't need a permit or a special driver for. It's light, it's easy on gas. I mean, that's kind of the equivalent I would give it in here. In interactivity, there's a lot of technology to be leveraged. We have gaming. That's a moving trajectory. They're developing functionality and technology in that space, independent of the industry, the oil and gas or the process industry or any other industry. They're developing technology. We have virtual reality. That's also a component, and sometimes kind of mashed with gaming. And then you have the interactivity of 3D that you find sometimes in a variety of 3D applications that may not necessarily be gaming applications. So maybe like an online 3D application or something like a VRML. It can be used for gaming, but it's not necessarily just that unique platform, and it's pretty interactive. How do we leverage all that interactivity? So you have in these industries folks already developing stuff for somebody to casually pick up a device and start to use it. And to use an avatar and to maneuver around that, or to immerse themselves in this space. So how do we leverage that? CAD companies have been trying for decades now, and the result in the industry is the development of game-based or industrial gaming technologies. And we'll talk a little bit about that. This is a trend. We use this a lot internally in Dassault. The first time I looked at it, since I wasn't used to looking at the spiral, I kept wanting to straighten the spiral and make it a life cycle asset management, kind of path that we've seen in the past. But the more I look at it, the more I like this spiral and the way it's showing it, because it's basically saying you start at one point, but this thing feeds back. It's a feedback loop, right? You really want to use the data, once you've matured and leveraged this 3D, you want to use it to get better at the way you design these facilities and get better at the way you build these things. So a circle or a spiral really draws that point a little bit better. In this spiral, we started to kind of put some technologies. Again, we're focused on 3D, so we do the whole gambit. I'm not going to talk about 1, 2, and 3, which is a lot of design and simulation and engineering data management. Of course, if you're curious about that, you can contact me and I'll point you in that direction to the right people. 4 and 5 is what I will be overviewing. I'll be talking about these immersive experiences and how we use this interactive 3D and how we use 3D also for decision support. So let's start with decision support. And if you have questions, I hope you're inputting them because these are a lot of topics. Typically, I'd spend a lot more time going through some of these slides and answering questions and stopping along the way. So decision support, I've started just for this, again, we have time limitations just to get everybody in on the same page with two areas that are interesting, which is kind of dashboard visualization and remote visualization. And they're not mutually exclusive. In fact, many times if you're talking about dashboard visualization, you're talking about remote visualization. But you don't need one to have the other as well. So some of the benefits of this in consolidated interactive view. So you can look at an asset view. So let's step back. We have all these databases on the bottom with all the data that you have, whether that is siloed or you've started to build an interoperability strategy in your organization. It's still just a ton of data. And there's a drive to say, okay, let's have these interactive, whether it's web service or web parts or something like that, ways of looking at data points or graphs and things like that. Well, we're getting more data, so wouldn't it be interesting to take that asset and start to also leverage that as a way of looking at the data, so that if I have something that I'm doing in one system, for example, when I'm looking at the 3D, I realize that one system is sitting right next to the other system. And that proximity may have an impact on how I put a project together or how I plan a shutdown or how I do a maintenance protocol. It may have an impact on how I learn about operating that system. So looking at that consolidated view of those two systems in one viewpoint, not as a P&ID layout where you're flipping through pages and trying to figure these things out, but just as, you know, here's a 3D view that I can maneuver and look around, almost like I'm walking in the facility, and make some observations about. The other thing is this federated data visualization. So if you can think of it as, now I have this 3D, it's consolidated for me. The fact that these things are systems that include subsystems, that they may be close to each other or far from each other. They may have pipes that transverse a facility. Now I can start to integrate these in a smart way to my backend system. So from the 3D, I can look at real-time data. I could look at data sheets, P&IDs, whatever information that is interesting to look at from that viewpoint. So if I click on a pump, I can use that information to query out all the information that's important to me as it relates to that pump. It's a little difficult to do if I'm just using a dashboard and I'm trying to say, okay, here's my tag. I find everything related to that tag, but I may not realize that that tag is sitting right next to another tag or another pipe that I want to find information on. So if I'm in the 3D and I click on the pump, I find everything and I realize, you know, there's another pump right here, right next to it. Let me find everything about that pump as well. So these federated views help you do that kind of thing. This multi-source visualization. So now I'm in the 3D and I have dashboards that show me other things. So not only am I finding things, maybe I'm reporting information right there in the same viewpoint. Snapshots of information that are important, KPIs that trigger a next step for the person looking at that data. And then this intuitive decision support concept. So especially interest when you're talking about real-time data and training. Real-time data, if you are having to make a decision about something, making a plan, a lot of times folks just go onto the facility and walk around. Well, if you need to make a quick decision, or if you're in the process of making a decision, if you have a team assembled already and you're trying to leverage expertise, you see how that wastes time to start to walk around or make a plan to go onto the facility and walk around. You could start to reduce the time spent and reduce errors if you can start to use that 3D data during your day-to-day operations in team meetings or when you're making a plan or when you're putting down a project, a schedule. So these types of things are some of the things that you look at when you're looking at the dashboard and remote visualization. The remote visualization, if I have a person sitting in Australia as part of my team, and I want to bring him in, we could start to have conversations prior to him, you know, taking a flight to Houston using these 3D data, and start to capture notes and comments through these meetings into this 3D data, and maybe push that into our information system in the back end. So those are some of the workflows that you could start to see in a decision support environment. So let's look a little bit further in here. I've talked a lot about decision support. Here's some concepts, and the concepts are really in the way of questions, because this is how we would start a conversation if I were to go, or someone from our group or our company were to go and sit with you. They would probably start with a series of questions, both from our side and your side, and those questions would generate an idea of the problem of what you're trying to do. This is a nuclear facility, and they've integrated it to both these automated workflows using animation. Again, these animations aren't random. It's not just somebody randomly generating animations. We've been able to also generate animations using data. So taking your, whether it's, you know, instructions like training instructions or something, and generate these animations. So they're actually technical animations, if you could call them. I've called them engineering grade animations, but you can name them whatever you want to. And then you see on that screenshot you have some actual data that's populated in the 3D environment. So I could see another view on the bottom screen, and on the left I could see another view of actual, you know, data, whether it be data sheets or snapshots or reports or indicators of some kind. So the questions that were asked when we started to put this story together with this interactive 3D is how do we do the shutdown planning? How do we minimize unplanned outages and ensure proper maintenance procedures and protocols are used? How do we ensure that safety that we've instituted is properly embedded into these workflows? How do we do that soft training? There was also questions about fatigue. With the 3D, it's the same technology. It may be the same exact use of that technology. So let's just say in an environment where you've actually put together this dashboard, you've put together how you want to do the snapshots. There's things that you could now start to gain out of it that you never thought you could. So one of them is this type of cluster analysis. I have 1,000 pumps spread out on this facility, publishing data. How can I use some information, visual or other, to start to ask questions and maybe drive another review of how I do maintenance on these pumps? Maybe these things are all turning orange around the same time, and that needs to drive another type of question, or near misses around the same time. And then how do you simulate these complex processes? So these simulations. The simulation in this interactive 3D space is not necessarily some of the sophisticated simulation you'll see, which you can do. That's not what I'm talking about. We do that also in 3D, but I'm talking about something where maybe you just use an avatar or an animation or a step animation to show you effectively a simulation of a workflow of a process that needs to be done. And maybe it's not necessarily the same type of simulation to determine the size of a vessel, but it's more of a simulation to show me how to do something or how something is done. So these type of remote visualization, again, you may be showing this to someone, and they may be an expert somewhere in the world, and you're showing them just to make sure you're on the right page, and you've captured all the inputs from all your experts. And as you're showing it, they may be saying, well, that's great, but you need to change this or that. And they're providing you that feedback using the 3D facility. So you can envision something like that. The dashboard visualization, I've zoomed in here. The top right is probably what most people think of when they think of dashboard visualization, which is I'm in some type of a 3D rendering of my facility, and I click on a piece of equipment, and I want to be able to see information, a snapshot, just like I would if I were in a dashboard, a report of some kind. And maybe that is an in-time, an actual kind of, this is what the temperature and pressure is right now. Or, this is what the temperature and pressure is 24 hours ago at the same time. Or maybe it's more of a report style on that particular piece of equipment, maybe a snapshot that you've generated, a template that says, operating temperature, operating pressure, and certain key parameters that you want folks to see right away. This is one way to do it. And there's a number of different ways to do this type of dashboard visualization. And I said that one does not necessarily mean you have to have the other. So you could have dashboard visualization that's localized, and maybe it's not necessarily remote. You could have, like on the bottom there, dashboard visualization that's in some kind of a visualization room, or a control, like a remote control room type setting. These kind of emergency decision support rooms where you have a number of monitors and different stakeholders in a room. And that may be the way you do that type of visualization. And it's just up to you how you do that. Normally I would stop here and ask, are there any questions? But again, I hope you're typing those in if you do have them. I'm going to move on to knowledge transfer. In knowledge transfer, everybody thinks of knowledge transfer as just training. Of course, I'm going to talk about training. That's here. I do want to say that knowledge transfer, when I think about it, and this is just from talking to a lot of you in the industry around this space, is bidirectional. So we're not just pushing data or information out to trainees. We're capturing information in our system. We're getting smarter. We're capturing all that expertise somehow. And we're also not just training in a kind of the formal way, but with technology we can be very creative. We're also using these environments to be working tools, but also disseminate information. So for example, when we bring the avatar, in a facility, it doesn't matter if the avatar is there to do, some kind of a HAZOP review, or if the avatar is there to do something else. The avatar has to have a hard hat, and has to have this or that, because that's part of the safety training that you are pushing out there. So you want to make sure that you're consistent on those types of aspects. So even though the safety training isn't the key component of that, maybe they're using that to do project planning or a hazard review or something like that. It's inadvertently part of your day-to-day process. So it's just something to consider. So virtual training, this is a space in and of itself, the virtual training, and it may be training on systems, it may be training on equipment assembly. What we found pretty much across the board as to why folks start to look at virtual training is traceability. So you want that technology to go ahead and trace how folks are being trained, if they've received the training and that kind of stuff. These paper documents or printed training classrooms, sometimes it's a little harder to do that in an automated way, and things can slip. The quality of the data. So these training instructions, do they match the engineering data? Is there a way to map that in an automated way? Well, if you're dealing with training on a system that has thousands of tags or thousands of instruments, and these things are being updated in some engineering system, how do you create an orchestration or workflow to map and update that into your training instruction? Do you think it's valuable to do that? The data integrity, you go into these manuals and then sometimes within the data itself it's not matching, meaning that I open this and page 1 is inconsistent with page 100. The tag that was shown on that system that explained to do a shutdown, and then when I go to do a startup procedure, the tags are not consistent. Again, how important is that if you're training these operators? I would think in this day and time it's becoming increasingly more important, considering the problem statements that we presented or I presented earlier, that data integrity is something you start to look at. And then interoperability, obviously the traceability, I brought that up, is you've already put these systems together. You've already started creating solutions to manage how you do some changes in your system on the engineering side, how you bring in or shut down something or change something out. How do you then use that in other parts of your organization, like the training? And really interoperability is one of the strategies to doing that, probably the key strategy. But I'm always open to different ideas, obviously. So just to kind of summarize what a solution needs to look like, and the triangles, everybody has a version of a triangle. This triangle is got a lot of tags on it, much like the facility. It needs to know that it's an engineering solution. So having a cartoon of the facility is not sufficient. It needs to be a representation. So bringing in the CAD and leveraging the actual CAD is probably a requirement, unless you're wanting to rebuild it or using laser scan or something, but using engineering data. And not just using engineering 3D data, but using engineering information. So when I click on something in the facility, it actually tells me that it's it's not a random design object, a cone _/, but it tells me that it's associated to this equipment and it's named properly, P001 or whatever the tag is. This data is so much. We've become very sophisticated. We're pulling in a lot of data fairly rapidly, actually. It's not a manual job. It's not a static or near manual job. It really needs to incorporate automation, sophisticated automation technologies, a lot like the stuff we've done, Dassault's done in aerospace and automotive. It's not just one executable, it's a series of executables that need to be orchestrated. It needs to be user-friendly. So that's the rub, right? You've got all this data, it's engineering grade, it's using all these engineering and complex concepts, but it needs to be something that anybody, this isn't their day-to-day, this isn't their specialization, can go in and take advantage of the system. So this is what an ideal solution would probably look like. And then we have some other things that should be customizable, it should be comprehensive, and it should really be centralized. It should be something, and not that it's centralized to the entire organization, but if you're looking at an asset, that asset should be centrally managed in one 3D view of it. You should have, you know, multiple 3D views that you're managing of that asset. Because the idea of the 3D is that it's consolidating and it's facilitating a lot of the complexity of all of the other data behind it. So you don't want this to now add a new degree of complexity to your organization. All right. So here's something that I show when I talk about knowledge transfer, because I always get the question about CAD versus VR. And Dassault, we've got all of the 3D, so I just went in and I asked somebody for a screenshot of a CAD viewer. We have the CAD, our 3D Live is our CAD viewer, and then I got a screenshot of the equivalent asset or facility using our gaming technology, our 3D VR viewer. And even if I hadn't pointed anything out, I think certain things become very obvious. Look at on the left, the complexity. You've got a lot of things in a CAD viewer that are necessary in that space. So you know, how you pan and view is specifically for a CAD person. And then that left-hand side, although you can hide that, we wanted to show that that's just the CAD hierarchy. That's an assembly tree, and it's very granular down to the elbows and each of the design components of that CAD. When you get into further down in your life cycle, you don't want to see all that. You don't want to see every elbow. You want to see a pipe system. You want to see a vessel or a drum. And you want it to be appropriately tagged coming from a back-end system. So in this VR, you see that. You see this 3D view. We've cleaned up the colors a little bit there, so you could do that with these technologies. What's interesting are the ability to look at your back-end data. So on the right-hand side, you see some windows. The bottom of that is actually just coming right out of a customer data set. In this particular scenario, we did a training, so that was just coming out of the training solution. And the top of that is transforming this 3D into something smart. So we now have an equipment list associated to that 3D. So you're not looking at 1,000 design elements associated to your distillation tower. You're looking at a distillation tower and a system and a subsystem that has instruments that are properly named. And when you click on anything, these things are all highlighting and they're interactive, so you can start to see snapshots and you can see specific information from this view. So here's another view of that facility. We've put an avatar in there. That avatar, you can use a mouse and keyboard to maneuver. You can use a gaming device like a gamepad to maneuver. We've put in some pretty interesting technology here so that when you're walking around, for example, if there's something between you, the viewer, and the avatar, those things go transparent. So that's what you're seeing there. We've developed a number of patents just in the last, I guess, year. So it's, again, a third of our revenues are in R&D, so you can imagine the innovation that's happening in the space. But walking the avatar through this facility, whether it's with a game, again, this isn't a game, so you're not walking the avatar through some imaginary world. You're walking the avatar through a real engineering facility designed with a degree of integrity, used with a CAD system. We've brought it in using translators. And the way I look at it is, look, you've got, in this particular scenario, we had manuals and facilities data and all this other stuff. Manuals, you have hundreds of manuals. You have thousands of data sets. The CAD itself is, gigs of data. There's really no way you would be able to look at this data and make decisions or leverage it in a smart way, any two of these databases, without technology. So right now you'd have one specialist going into the manuals, and they would know the manuals like the back of their hand, probably. Maybe there would be more than one, and they would have those divided. And you have somebody that knows the 3D like the back of their hand, and maybe they're also the person that navigates the 3D for you. In this scenario, we actually had operators going through and training in a facility. So they were walking in and navigating, and they were able to look at pretty complicated data and use it for training. So they were using engineering data and facilities data to train on a facility, real data. So if you can imagine the accomplishment there to do that. The workflow is pretty simple. It's a day-to-day workflow. It's something that you're going to do. You're going to familiarize yourself with the facility or get to know the facility, walking around, clicking on things. Maybe you'll do a training procedure in the facility. So the workflow is pretty simple, but the data that we brought in to do this, the orchestration behind it, the complexity of the data, and how we do today look at that data isn't trivial. So it's a huge accomplishment. Again, you're looking at that screenshot and thinking, this is too easy, and that's good. That's what we wanted, it to look too easy, too simple. So I'm going to close this out because we're running on time. I did want to give kind of a snapshot of market offerings in interactive 3D. So in interactive 3D, we have an asset visualization. If you're looking at a facilities view or refining or process facility. Now, this is where folks sometimes have questions. Is, okay, well, why don't I just take a tool that I used to do interactivity on a wheel or a car, or, I saw what, a company that designs stores or something, interactive stores or interactive malls, why don't I take that technology and use it for my asset visualization? That is not, again, it's going back to that truck and the pickup truck scenario. Those tools are just not designed to do that right now. So something that is designed to make a wheel interactive or an individual pump interactive is not sufficiently robust and equipped to manage an entire asset. So those are two different technologies even within Dassault. So we have, for example, a tool we call a composer that we would use to take in a studio or another 3D CAD of, let's say, an individual pump or an individual, even a car, and make it very interactive. You can open the pump up, you can rotate it, you can assemble it interactively, you can use all kinds of great technology, very sophisticated technology to make that component or product interactive, and it would be part of our product lifecycle strategy. We have a tool, for example, that allows you to go into a store, click on inventory in that store, a Tylenol bottle, find information about that Tylenol, walk around. But again, that is not the same functionality that you'd want for the asset. So we even internally understand that there are different functionalities, there are different tools. The industry also understands that. It's not the same tool even in the industry if you wanted to do these individual things. What I've been talking about for this conversation in these PowerPoints is really asset visualization, interactive asset visualization. It's not CAD viewing. I've really tried to draw a line between that. It's not a component view. It's taking a massive amount of facilities view where you have complex graphics and rendering it in such a way that I can simplify the dashboard and the look to an end user that's going to use it for the day-to-day use, but is not necessarily a specialist. And it needs to be robust enough to understand the engineering 3D data, but also robust enough to understand the engineering information data beneath that. So renaming that 3D, integrating to engineering systems, facility systems, whatever you want to integrate it to. So that's where I've been focused on. Now, I picked this out of our Dassault slide decks that we have available for folks to use, because I wanted to delineate the differences just in this interactive space of the type of 3D you'd use. I also wanted to say, from our perspective, it's interesting, and for me working in Dassault, that we have all of these options available. And the live marketing is that you could go on our website, and we've developed a lot of things there, cloud with 3D, and you can leverage all these things into your marketing environment. But we have all these elements in this technology in the same organization, so that gives the flexibility, obviously, if someone were to say, well, I'm in asset management, but I saw something really cool that you guys did in a Composer tool or in one of these other applications, how do we start to look at leveraging that? So that does give us that flexibility. So that's kind of a side note at the entail of that discussion. But I really wanted you to see the differences between the types of technology in the market and compare it to your needs and what you put together when you're looking at a strategy in this space, and not to commingle, just because this was really cool on a pump doesn't mean it's going to translate very well for an entire facility. Before I finish off and start opening it up for questions, and we have a few minutes here, I did want to just do some housekeeping. We've been doing some really great things with FIATech. One of the things that I actually be involved in with some FIATech folks is a project that we've put together around this exact space, around looking at 3D, targeting operations. And here's our justification for that. We've sat around and we've gotten together with a number of users, and we understand the drivers for the space. We have the technology, we've enabled it, we've been doing this for years. Dassault's done it in vehicles and in aerospace and all this, and now bringing all that into oil and gas in a very aggressive manner. But we understand that we cannot do this alone. We need to make it a sustainable model. We need to get the industry to start to look at standards and how this is going to move forward and be a long-term solution and strategy for the industry. So we've engaged FIATech. The first part of the project, and let me just go here. I'm not going to read this whole thing. You can read the project. If you're interested in the project, definitely feel free to contact myself or anyone in FIATech to be involved in it. But the first part is just to kind of look at some commonplace themes in interactive 3D, and particularly for owner-operators, really probably in the oil and gas space, although we're flexible. We're not very rigid, so if you're in chemical process or something, we will accept you. We've partnered up with Texas A&M for this project. And that's just a great partnership because Texas A&M is already doing a lot in this space. And so we'll be able to start to look into this. And there's a number of oil and gas companies that have already joined our group here. I haven't put the logos on because I didn't have time to go and reach out and ask everybody for logos, but this is definitely an area of interest. And I think, the future of how we look at a lot of facilities management, facilities training, and all of that. To kickstart the project, we'll be hosting a lunch. I've organized a lunch, and I've been very lucky with the amount of interest on the topic. For the lunch, Texas A&M will be coming out to present. The Dean of Texas A&M, Dr. Venegas, is our sponsor and our keynote. We may have some changes in agenda there, so instead of the Dean, we'll have the Director of Applied Science coming out physically. But like I told the Dean when I spoke to him on this topic, I said, well, it's like having me choose between diamonds and gold, equivalent value of diamonds and gold. I'll take either or. It's just impressive with the amount of interest that we're getting here. If you haven't received this invitation, again, reach out to me or someone in FIATech to get it. We're partnering up with IBM and Christie on this. Christie Digital does all the hardware. We will have a portable cave on site at this lunch. For those of you who have never seen that, we'll have all the 3D content in that cave and talk about the use cases of that, that combination at the lunch. All right. I'm done with my presentation. If anyone else has questions, please feel free. Or did we have any questions, Ray, that we could address?
Thank you, Nelia. I have some questions, so I'll bring those forward, and certainly welcome continued questions from folks. Well, I'll put this first one forward. What design software models can be used to create the 3D visualization asset management model?
Well, the design is really up to the user. Of course, Dassault has design tools. We have SolidWorks and CATIA. So, like any organization, if you were to use one of our design tools, it makes it easier for us in a number of ways. But if you already use, let's say, we have a lot of customers that they're beholden to the contractor, and the contractor says, well, we're experts in PDMS or MicroStation or whatever other design tool. We're bringing that data in as well. So we have translators, and we're able to import that data and make it interactive as well. And in fact, the screenshots I showed you, that was PDMS data.
Okay, great. And a related one, when models are being built and used in the design, procurement, and construction phases, particularly when they're initially being built in design, is there any guidance on how to best prepare for the 3D visualization and asset management? So if you were helping someone build their design model or participating at that point, would you be guiding them to structure it in a particular way, or can you just input models neutrally regardless of how they're created?
There are best practices. There are best practices in this space and recommendations that we could provide. And I hate to sound like a kind of a broken record, but since we do the design piece, one of the reason it makes that easier for us is that translating from our own design tools into our own interactive and visualization tools, that technology the onus is on us to make that work in a very intelligent manner. So even if you don't incorporate all the standards, when it's in all of our tools, the interoperability is substantial. Now, that said, if you use another tool like a PDMS or MicroStation, the first step is to use standard design rules when designing anything. So there are standards out there. We hope that you're taking advantage of those. The second step is to sit down and start to understand what you want to do and to put some best practices together. If you're an owner-operator and you're not controlling the design side, we could sit and help put down, if we're working with you, if Dassault were working with you, you could put best practices together. If you're on the contract side and you're saying, well, we want to be able to give this option to our customer as a deliverable, we could also work with you on that and even work with your customer to put together some strategies and best practices for that. This conversation is an hour, so we can't get into the nuances of how that would work. But definitely there are strategies and best practices to building a design to be used for interactive 3D further down in the life cycle of the asset.
Okay, thanks, Nelia. Another is really a request. A person has said, excellent presentation, so compliments on that.
Thank you.
And is it possible to send the presentation for us? I think maybe for this individual or anyone, can they contact you directly? Can you give them, would you be okay to give them your email, and anyone who wants the presentation could request it from you?
I'd have to check on how I deliver a presentation. Definitely the video or the recording will be on Fiatech, so if you wanted to go back and review the recording or the video of the presentation, that will be available to you. Actually giving you the PowerPoint, I'd have to check on that.
Okay.
But feel free to email me and remind me, and I'm happy to follow up on that question.
So your email address, did we have it on one of your slides somewhere?
You did. Let me go back here.
So I have it. What? And
it's Nelia.
Nelia said we recorded this presentation, and it will be on the Fiatech website at fiatech.org, so you can see the presentation in the video, but we don't post the presentation itself. And maybe if you can't send the PowerPoint, you could send the PDF. And
yeah, like I said, just contact me and I'll try to come up with something that hopefully works for everyone.
So you do have Nelia's email address up here for you to pick up. So I had another request from a person. It's really a request rather than a question. That they're working on an AR plus, so an augmented reality plus project, and they wondered if they could contact you directly. So I'd say response is the same here. You're providing your email address for anyone that would like to follow up for any reason.
Yes, and with the augmented stuff, and unfortunately we have to limit all the legs. This topic is very broad and it has a lot of elements to it. So there's things I obviously didn't have time to talk, but I had to focus. I'm happy to talk to you about that off, not in this time, but maybe at a later time. Contact me, and I'm happy to talk about that. Yeah.
Great. Another question. So you had a focus on your presentation around plant projects. Have you used this in other facilities such as hospitals?
Yeah, there was the last slide, or one of the close to the ending slides I showed, kind of a market overview of the different technologies. I pulled that from Dassault, one of our slides that we have in 3D Via, and we do the gambit of solutions in the space, including stores and other facilities. I just had to focus. I needed to focus on something, so I couldn't go too broad. But yes, definitely that is something that we have offerings in.
Okay. So along with the visualization model, how do you connect with facility information models? And sort of related to that, are there information model formats that can be best incorporated from BIM standards or other standards?
Yes, we're doing some things that are very similar to what you'd find in BIM. And again, because I had to focus on plan, I didn't go into the building information management, concept. We have in Dassault a tool that allows you to, it's kind of like a Google almost. It allows you to go in and crawl your systems and create a search-based integration from the 3D to your third-party application. So that's one of the strategies we would present, for example. We have a number of other strategies as it relates to integration and interoperability. So it's interesting because we're a 3D company, but we're also 3D enabling. So we have all these tools that are like, how do you allow the 3D to integrate? How do you allow the 3D to have some management capability? How do we manage this information coming from design and going into operations? So you have tools like that as well as part of our strategy kind of portfolio. We definitely would talk about that with you, and depending on what you're trying to do and what you're trying to integrate.
And the other part of that is, do you have recommended, preferred, or maybe a limited set of informational model formats like BIM standards or ISO standards or other? Is there a standards area that you follow or are limited to or recommend, or are you neutral on how data is organized?
We're fairly neutral. I mean, obviously, you do need to have some type of organization. So that's the most important thing. You'd be surprised to know that some organizations, and maybe it's because you haven't really thought about this, not only have no organization, but in some scenarios have no data attached to many of these files at all. So it's very difficult in those scenarios. So you do need to have some type of organization. That said, we're fairly neutral. We could use your organizational model, or if you're using a standard, of course, we would leverage those models. So we're pretty flexible in that space. We don't necessarily, we don't have one standard that we only follow, if that's the question.
Okay, great. Thanks, Nelia. Well, we've come to the conclusion of our hour. I want to thank Nelia for her great presentation and the information she shared. And again, there is a recording being made. It'll be available on our webinar site in the next few days. I want to thank everyone for participating today and questions asked. So hope you can join us for our next webinar, which is next week on Tuesday, and it's got a complimentary title on asset lifecycle information configuration management and deployment. So thanks again for your participation and have a great week. Bye now.